The hall was buzzing with excitement as people found their seats, the soft murmur of conversations blending with the delicate clinking of glasses. This was one of the most anticipated musical gatherings in the city, a place where talent and reputation were tested under the watchful eyes of society. At the center of the room, near a grand piano that gleamed under the chandeliers, stood the Italian musician, tall and confident, his posture perfect, his gaze commanding attention. He had earned fame through years of rigorous training, mesmerizing audiences with his skill and flair. Many admired him, while some quietly wondered if his arrogance outweighed his talent. He had been speaking just moments ago, dismissing Chopin's work as overly sentimental and lacking the grandeur of classical masters. His voice carried easily, reaching even the farthest corners of the hall. "Chopin is fine for simple enjoyment," he said with a casual wave of his hand. "But real music, music that commands respect, is something else entirely. It has strength, clarity, and the power to move hearts without relying on fragile emotions." Some nodded in agreement, some looked uncomfortable, and a few discreetly exchanged glances, remembering how Chopin's music had stirred deep emotions even in the most stoic listeners. A group of musicians nearby whispered among themselves, sharing quiet amusement at his bold statements. One leaned over and muttered, "He always has to be the center of attention, even at the expense of others." Yet, despite their disapproval, they all acknowledged his skill. His fingers could dance across the keys with precision, his performances had charm, and his interpretations were technically brilliant. Still, there was something about his dismissive attitude that left a bitter taste for those who loved Chopin. The Italian musician moved closer to the piano, running his fingers lightly over the keys, as if to remind everyone present of his mastery. He smiled, almost indulgently, at the audience who had come to see him perform. But behind that smile, there was a flicker of challenge. He was ready to prove, in his own mind, that Chopin's music was not worthy of admiration, at least not in the presence of someone like him. Across the hall, near the back, a young Polish woman watched silently. She had heard the Italian musician's words, and while a part of her felt nervous, another part felt a quiet determination. She had spent years studying Chopin's compositions, not just the notes but the feelings behind them. For her, the music was alive, a conversation between the soul and the keys. She had seen how Chopin's work could move people, how it could evoke emotions that words alone could not capture. The idea of someone dismissing it so casually stirred something deep within her. She held a small piece of sheet music, her hand steady despite the flutter in her chest. She had not come to confront him directly. Her plan was simple. If given the chance, she would play, and the music itself would speak. She knew that emotions could not be faked and that technical skill alone could not convey the depth of Chopin's compositions. The notes must be felt, lived, and shared. As she watched him, she realized that tonight might be her moment, a chance to show what true music could do when played with heart. The Italian musician began to perform, and the room filled with the sound of his piano. His fingers moved with elegance, each note precise, each chord sharp and clear. The audience watched in admiration, some whispering praises while others admired quietly, holding their own reservations about his dismissive attitude. He played with flair, showing off his mastery and subtle nuances, his performance polished and confident. Yet, despite the perfection, there was a sense that something was missing. It was strong, impressive, but not stirring in the way that some music could reach into the depths of the soul. The young Polish woman listened intently, her gaze fixed on the piano, but her mind focused on what she would play next. She could feel the atmosphere, the tension between arrogance and unacknowledged beauty, the silent debate among the audience, and the subtle impatience of those who longed for music that spoke beyond skill. She understood that her performance would need to do more than impress. It would need to touch, to open hearts, to remind everyone why music mattered in ways beyond technique. As the Italian musician finished, there was polite applause, some enthusiastic, some hesitant. He bowed with a confident smile, acknowledging the audience's approval, but he seemed unaware of the quiet stirrings in the room, the subtle glances exchanged among those who had long admired Chopin's works. Some of the audience members leaned back, thoughtful, as if the performance, though impressive, had not filled them the way they had hoped. The young woman stepped forward slowly, her presence unassuming but steady. She placed her hands lightly on the piano keys, feeling the smoothness beneath her fingers, and took a deep breath. The hall seemed to hush, sensing the contrast in energy, a shift in anticipation. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, connecting not just with the notes on the sheet, but with the story behind the music, the whispers of emotions that Chopin had poured into every measure. The Italian musician watched her curiously, his earlier confidence unshaken. He could not imagine that a young, quiet woman could hold a candle to the brilliance he had just displayed. He leaned slightly, a faint smirk on his lips, perhaps thinking of the applause he expected to follow once she played. The audience, too, leaned forward, sensing the beginning of something delicate, unsure of what to expect. And then her fingers began to move. The opening notes of the Nocturne floated gently through the hall, soft and tender, each one deliberate, each one alive with emotion. The music was not loud or flashy, but it carried a subtle power, a quiet insistence that drew listeners in. Slowly, the room transformed. The hum of conversation faded, the shifting of feet stopped, and all eyes turned toward the piano, where the young woman let the music speak. She did not rush the notes. Each pause, each delicate touch, held meaning. She played as though speaking directly to each person, whispering to the hearts of those who had come to witness skill, challenging them to feel something deeper. Her connection to the music was palpable, as if she had become a vessel for Chopin's soul, translating emotion into sound with purity and sincerity. As the performance continued, the Italian musician's smirk slowly faded. He watched, fascinated despite himself, unable to pull his attention away. Something about the way she played, the depth of feeling in each note, was unlike anything he had dismissed. There was a subtle mastery in her touch, a way of conveying sorrow and joy, hope and longing, all within the gentle rise and fall of the melody. He felt a quiet stirring in his chest, a sensation he had not expected, a recognition that perhaps he had underestimated what music could do. The audience sat in silence, caught in the spell of the Nocturne. Whispers of admiration were gone, replaced by stillness, a collective breath held in awe. The young Polish woman continued, her fingers dancing lightly, not for praise, not for recognition, but to honor the music itself. It was a performance that required patience and attention, a gentle insistence that beauty could not be rushed, that emotion could not be faked. By the time the final note lingered in the air, the hall seemed suspended in a moment outside of time. The sound faded, leaving only silence, profound and complete. The Italian musician looked down at the piano, his hands still poised as if he had been caught off guard. The smirk was gone, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement, a hint of respect that had begun to take root. The audience, too, remained still, processing the impact of what they had just experienced. In that silence, a transformation began. The arrogance that had dominated the room was softened, replaced by recognition of something greater than skill, something that required more than confidence or showmanship. It was the power of music itself, its ability to touch hearts, to connect souls across distance and time, to reveal truths that words alone could not express. The young Polish woman closed her eyes, her hands lifting from the keys slowly. She felt a mix of relief and quiet triumph, knowing that she had conveyed not just the notes, but the essence of the music. She did not seek accolades. She only wished to honor the beauty she had devoted herself to. Around her, the hall seemed to breathe again, the spell of the Nocturne lingering like a soft echo in every heart. And somewhere in the back, the Italian musician, who had mocked and ridiculed, felt a stirring of humility. He had seen what true connection to music looked like, what it meant to let emotion flow freely, to touch others without arrogance or display. It was a moment that would stay with him, a quiet lesson delivered by someone he had underestimated, a reminder that music, at its best, transcends pride, skill, and ego. It simply is, and in its presence, even the most confident must pause and listen. The young Polish woman remained near the piano, her heart still racing from the attention in the hall. Though she had not yet played, she could feel the weight of expectation pressing on her, the invisible tension created by the Italian musician's bold dismissals. She had grown up with Chopin's music around her, the melodies as familiar as breathing. Yet there was a difference between hearing and performing. She understood that tonight was not just about playing notes. It was about showing the spirit behind them, the emotions that could not be captured by skill alone. She adjusted the sheet music on the stand and straightened her posture, taking slow, measured breaths to calm her mind. Her hands hovered over the keys, feeling the smooth, cool surface under her fingertips. The hall had grown quiet, all eyes now on her, waiting. Some were curious, some skeptical, and some, like her, hopeful that Chopin's music would finally receive the recognition it deserved. She felt a mixture of nervousness and determination, knowing this could be her moment to bridge the gap between technical brilliance and heartfelt expression. Around her, the audience whispered quietly among themselves. Some remembered the Italian musician's earlier mockery and were curious to see how she would respond. Others simply anticipated a new performance, hoping for a moment of magic that would make the evening unforgettable. In the back, a few musicians exchanged glances, sensing the potential for something extraordinary, yet unwilling to show their anticipation too openly. The atmosphere was charged, a delicate mix of tension and curiosity. The Italian musician watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. He had expected someone timid, perhaps nervous, someone who might falter under pressure. He could not have imagined the calm confidence she radiated, nor the quiet intensity in her eyes. He leaned slightly, his hands clasped behind his back, trying to gauge what she might do. There was a faint smile, but it did not reach his eyes, which were sharp, analyzing, perhaps a little wary. He had faced talented musicians before, yet something about her presence unsettled him in a way he did not fully understand. The young woman took a deep breath, letting it out slowly as she centered herself. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, recalling the countless hours she had spent practicing, not just the technical aspects, but the feelings behind each piece. She thought of the quiet nights when she had played Chopin alone, letting the music guide her thoughts, and of the emotions that had emerged unbidden: joy, longing, melancholy, hope. Each note was a story, a reflection of human experience, and she was determined to let those stories speak. She began to play softly, the initial notes of the Nocturne floating gently through the hall. The sound was delicate, careful, yet filled with subtle depth. The audience leaned in, drawn by the unexpected tenderness. The Italian musician's expression shifted slightly. He tilted his head, curious despite himself. His fingers, which had so recently commanded the piano with precision and confidence, now paused as he listened. There was a quality in her touch that went beyond technique, a sense of understanding, of living the music rather than performing it. The young woman continued, her fingers moving with grace, each note carrying emotion without excess. She did not play to impress, she played to express, and that made all the difference. The audience felt it immediately. The hall, which had been filled with polite chatter and polite applause, now seemed to hold its breath. Eyes softened, shoulders relaxed, and an almost tangible connection formed between the music and everyone present. Each person felt as if the notes were speaking directly to them, revealing something personal and profound. The Italian musician tried to maintain his composure, but he could not ignore the effect of her playing. He had mocked Chopin, dismissed the music as sentimental, yet here it was commanding attention and touching hearts in a way he had never expected. He realized that this was not about technique alone. He had always valued precision, speed, and showmanship, but the music he was hearing now had a different power, one that stirred emotions he had long kept at bay. He felt a quiet, unfamiliar humility creeping in. As the young woman played, she allowed herself to feel the music fully. She let the gentle rises and falls of the melody mirror the emotions she had carried with her, blending sorrow with hope, tension with release. The hall responded. People who had been skeptical, people who had come merely out of curiosity, now leaned forward, captivated. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others shifted slightly in their seats, holding their breath as if afraid to disturb the fragile beauty unfolding before them. She noticed the subtle shifts in the audience and allowed them to guide her expression. Not through exaggeration or performance, but through sincerity. Each chord, each pause, each delicate touch on the keys was infused with honesty. She was no longer simply playing Chopin. She was channeling the emotions, the stories embedded in the music, and offering them freely to those listening. The connection was instantaneous, the effect undeniable. The Italian musician's gaze remained fixed on her, his earlier confidence replaced by something quieter, more reflective. He could not help but be drawn in by the authenticity of her performance. He had never experienced music in quite this way, never felt the intimacy and immediacy that her playing conveyed. Slowly, he began to understand that the true measure of a musician was not in their technical prowess alone, but in their ability to breathe life into the notes, to make listeners feel as though they were experiencing the music for the first time. The young woman's hands moved with precision, yet they were guided by emotion, not by a desire to impress. She allowed moments of silence to linger, letting the resonance fill the room. The audience felt the weight of each pause, the subtle power of restraint. It was a reminder that music was not only about sound, but about space, about the emotions that could be evoked between the notes as much as within them. The Italian musician's mind raced as he listened. He thought of all the times he had judged other composers too quickly, all the times he had relied solely on his own opinion of what constituted greatness. And here was a young woman, quiet and unassuming, showing him a truth he had ignored. Music was not a competition of skill. It was an expression of humanity. It was connection, vulnerability, and honesty, and he could not deny the power of what he was witnessing. The young woman continued to play, her fingers caressing the keys with gentle determination. She was aware of the room, aware of the Italian musician, but she did not allow it to distract her. She had prepared for this moment for years, and now, with every note, she shared that preparation and passion. The hall seemed to become a part of the music itself, each listener responding in their own way, some with tears welling quietly, others with a smile or a sigh, all united by the shared experience. As she reached the middle section of the Nocturne, her playing grew more intense, more expressive, without losing its delicate balance. The audience could feel the story unfolding, the emotions rising and falling naturally. The Italian musician felt an unfamiliar stir of awe and admiration, a quiet respect forming in his heart. He had been certain of his own superiority, but now he faced a challenge to everything he had believed. The music was alive, and he was powerless to resist its pull. The young woman played on, each measure a testament to her dedication and understanding. The room was silent except for the sound of the piano, yet within that silence was a deep resonance that touched everyone present. She did not play for recognition or applause. She played to honor the music, to bring it to life, and in doing so, she connected with the hearts of all who listened. When she finally paused, the effect was immediate. The hall seemed to exhale as one, a collective release of tension and emotion. The Italian musician looked down at the piano, a faint, reflective expression on his face. He had not anticipated this. He had not expected the music to speak so clearly, to convey so much without a single word. And he realized, with quiet humility, that he had much to learn about the power of true artistry. The young Polish woman lifted her hands from the keys, her breathing calm but her heart still racing. She had done what she had come to do. She had played not to compete, not to prove herself to the Italian musician, but to honor the music and let it speak for itself. And in doing so, she had created a moment that would linger in the memories of everyone present, a moment of connection, reflection, and shared humanity. As the audience remained still, absorbing the experience, the young woman stepped back slightly, allowing the Italian musician and the listeners to process what they had heard. She did not look for praise. She only hoped that the music had been understood, felt, and appreciated. In that silence, a subtle shift had occurred. The arrogance that had filled the room was tempered by the realization that music could touch the soul in ways that could not be measured, judged, or dismissed. Could only be experienced, and when experienced with sincerity, it had the power to transform. The hall had grown quiet, the hum of whispered conversations replaced by the soft resonance of the nocturne flowing from the young Polish woman's fingers. She played with a subtle strength, not loud or showy, but with an honesty that could not be ignored. Each note carried its own emotion, the rises and falls of the melody reflecting the depth of thought and feeling that had gone into her preparation. Her eyes were sometimes closed, sometimes open, yet always focused, connecting with the music and, through it, with everyone present. The audience, initially polite and curious, began to shift in their seats. Some leaned forward, captivated by the delicate interplay of the notes, while others closed their eyes, allowing the music to wash over them. The air in the hall seemed charged, as if the sound itself had created a gentle gravity pulling everyone closer to the piano. It was not just a performance. It was an invitation to experience something profoundly human. The Italian musician remained standing nearby, observing intently. His earlier confidence had faded, replaced by a quiet curiosity and, slowly, a dawning respect. He had believed that technical mastery alone could command admiration, yet here was a young woman demonstrating that true artistry was more than skill. It was the ability to communicate emotion, to breathe life into every note. He had faced many pianists before, but he had never encountered such authenticity in a performance. He tried to maintain his composure, yet he felt an unfamiliar tension in his chest. He recognized the subtle control she exercised over the music, the way she let silence become part of the expression, how each pause and each touch of the keys was deliberate and full of meaning. It was a lesson in humility, in understanding that music was not about pride or dominance, but about connection. He could feel the audience's admiration and, slowly, his own skepticism began to dissolve. The young woman played on, her fingers gliding over the keys with gentle precision. She allowed the music to guide her, letting each note unfold naturally. The dynamics of the piece rose and fell with intention, carrying a story that was both personal and universal. She was not simply performing. She was conversing with the hearts of everyone listening, inviting them into the emotional world of the nocturne. The audience responded instinctively, sensing the sincerity and depth behind every gesture. Some listeners felt a chill run through them, the subtle melancholy of the music striking a chord with memories and emotions long hidden. Others smiled softly, touched by the warmth and tenderness conveyed through the careful phrasing. Even the most skeptical seemed to pause, recognizing that the music was speaking a truth that could not be argued with. It was a gentle insistence, a quiet power that left no room for distraction or doubt. The Italian musician's fingers twitched slightly, almost unconsciously, as he absorbed the performance. He had spent his life perfecting technique, focusing on speed, accuracy, and showmanship, yet he could see now that there was a missing element in his approach. He realized that the young woman's strength lay not in technical prowess alone, but in her ability to translate emotion into sound, to make the piano an extension of her own heart. Each chord she played resonated deeply, leaving an impression that no display of skill alone could match. As the nocturne progressed, the young woman's confidence grew. She allowed herself to feel the music fully, letting each note carry the weight of thought and feeling. The room seemed to respond to her presence, the audience leaning closer, listening more intently, caught in the spell of a performance that was as much about emotion as it was about melody. It was a rare moment when music transcended technique, when the audience became part of the story being told. She noticed the subtle reactions of those around her, including the Italian musician, and allowed it to guide her expression. Not through exaggeration or manipulation, but through sincerity. Every touch of the keys was deliberate, every pause a reflection of emotion. She was not performing for applause, nor was she trying to compete. She was simply giving life to the music, letting it speak in its purest form. The effect was immediate and profound. The Italian musician, who had once dismissed Chopin's work, now felt a mixture of awe and humility. He could see, in the quiet concentration and emotional depth of the young woman, a reminder of what music could truly accomplish. It was not about impressing others or asserting dominance. It was about communicating something timeless, something that resonated with the human experience. He found himself listening not as a critic, but as a student, absorbing the lesson unfolding before him. The audience, too, was caught in a shared experience. Some felt tears welling in their eyes, moved by the honesty of the performance. Others leaned back, holding their breath, savoring the delicate beauty of each note. It was as if time had slowed, each moment stretched to allow the music to penetrate every corner of the hall. The young woman's playing created a space where emotion could exist freely, without judgment, without expectation. It was a rare and precious gift. She played the middle section of the Nocturne with particular intensity, drawing on the contrasts in the music to convey both tension and release. The audience felt the ebb and flow of emotion, the way the melody could express longing, sorrow, hope, and joy in a single movement. The Italian musician, standing silently, felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a recognition that true mastery was not measured in technical skill alone, but in the ability to move others, to inspire reflection and feeling. The young woman's hands moved with fluidity, guided by a deep connection to the music. She did not rush. She did not overplay. Each note was intentional, each phrase a conversation with the audience. She understood that Chopin's genius lay not only in the notes themselves, but in the emotions they could evoke. By honoring that intention, she brought the composition to life, allowing it to resonate in ways that transcended time and place. The Italian musician felt a subtle shift within himself. He had come to the hall expecting admiration for his skill, confident in his own abilities. Instead, he found himself humbled, forced to confront the limitations of his perspective. He realized that music was not a contest, not a measure of superiority, but a bridge between hearts, a language that spoke without words. The young woman, with her quiet determination and deep understanding, had reminded him of this truth. As the performance approached its conclusion, the young woman's playing grew softer, more introspective. She allowed the final notes to linger, letting the resonance fill the hall and settle gently over the audience. There was a sense of completion, of fulfillment, as if a story had been told and the listeners had been given permission to reflect on its meaning. The silence that followed was profound, a shared acknowledgement of the beauty that had just unfolded. The Italian musician stood silently, his hands clasped behind his back. He could not speak, could not interrupt the moment. He had been challenged, humbled, and inspired, all in the space of a single performance. He understood now that true artistry required more than skill. It required empathy, understanding, and a willingness to let the music speak beyond oneself. The young Polish woman had demonstrated this with grace and clarity, leaving an indelible mark on all who had listened. The audience remained still, absorbing the final notes and the lingering emotional resonance. There were no immediate words of praise, no hurried applause, only a quiet, reflective acknowledgement of what had been experienced. The young woman, sensing the depth of the moment, allowed herself a small, calm smile. She had not sought to dominate or to prove herself. She had simply let the music live, and in doing so had connected with everyone present in a way that words could not capture. The Italian musician finally exhaled, a small, almost imperceptible sigh, as he began to comprehend the impact of the performance. He had been certain of his own judgment, certain that Chopin's music lacked the weight and strength he valued. Yet now, faced with such authenticity and emotional depth, he recognized the limitations of his previous assumptions. Music was not merely about skill or reputation. It was about honesty, expression, and connection. In that moment, the young Polish woman had changed more than just the mood of the hall. She had challenged perceptions, opened hearts, and reminded everyone present of the true purpose of music. She had shown that the power of a composition lay not only in its notes, but in the courage and sincerity of the one who played it. The Italian musician, standing in quiet contemplation, began to understand that admiration for music could not be demanded or assumed. It had to be earned through honesty and emotional resonance. The final notes faded completely, leaving the hall in a suspended, almost reverent silence. It was a silence filled with respect, reflection, and a deep appreciation for the performance that had just concluded. The young woman stepped back from the piano, her hands relaxed, her breathing steady. She had given her all, not for recognition, not for competition, but for the music itself. And in doing so, she had created a moment that would linger in the hearts of everyone present. A moment that would be remembered for its authenticity, beauty, and emotional truth. The final note of the Nocturne faded into the quiet of the hall, leaving a deep, resonant silence. It was a silence unlike any other, not awkward or hesitant, but heavy with understanding and awe. The young Polish woman's fingers lingered for a moment above the keys, then slowly lifted, as if releasing the emotion she had poured into the performance. The audience remained still, their breaths caught, their hearts stirred by the delicate power of the music they had just witnessed. The hall seemed suspended in time, held together by the echo of notes that had touched something deeply human in everyone present. The Italian musician stood frozen, a strange mixture of surprise, admiration, and humility washing over him. He had expected a timid performance, perhaps one that would falter under the weight of expectation. Instead, he had witnessed something extraordinary, something that transcended technical skill. He could feel the truth of her playing, the sincerity and depth that could not be faked or rehearsed. For the first time, he understood that music was more than precision, more than speed or showmanship. It was a language of the soul. He looked around the hall, noticing how every listener had been affected. Some had tears quietly brimming in their eyes, others had their hands pressed lightly to their hearts, and a few sat with a soft, reflective smile, lost in their thoughts. No one spoke, for words would have seemed inadequate, almost intrusive. The young woman had created a shared moment, a connection that required no commentary, only attention and feeling. She had transformed the room, and everyone in it, by her dedication to the essence of the music. The Italian musician felt a gentle tightening in his chest, a rare sensation that he could not easily identify. He had been so sure of his own superiority, so certain that Chopin's compositions were overly sentimental and weak. Yet here he was, confronted by undeniable evidence of their power. The young woman's performance had bypassed his defenses, reaching him in a way he had not anticipated. He felt humbled, not by criticism, but by realization, by the undeniable truth that artistry could touch hearts where arrogance could not. The young Polish woman allowed herself a quiet exhale, feeling the energy of the hall slowly settle. She did not look for applause, did not seek validation beyond what she had already felt while playing. For her, the moment was complete in itself. She had given everything to the music, had let it flow through her, and in doing so had offered it fully to the listeners. The respect and awe in the room were not directed at her alone. They were a testament to the music itself, to the timeless beauty and emotional resonance of Chopin's work. As the silence lingered, the Italian musician took a careful step forward. He could feel the weight of his own pride and the fragility of his earlier dismissals. He had learned a lesson that night, one that no amount of experience or recognition could have taught. He approached the piano slowly, his eyes fixed on the young woman. There was a quiet respect in his expression, a recognition of her talent, her courage, and the way she had brought Chopin's music to life in a way he could not have anticipated. He spoke softly, his voice carrying across the hall without breaking the fragile quiet. "Your performance, it is remarkable. I underestimated Chopin, and I underestimated what you could do with his music. You have shown a truth that I had overlooked." His words were sincere, free from arrogance, acknowledging not only her skill but the emotional depth and authenticity she had displayed. The young woman nodded slightly, accepting his words with quiet grace, not seeking further praise but appreciating the recognition of her effort and understanding. Around the hall, others began to release the held breath of anticipation, their expressions reflecting relief and wonder. Some whispered softly, sharing their thoughts on the profound experience they had just witnessed. Yet no one rushed to break the silence too quickly, sensing that this moment was special, delicate, and worth lingering over. The music had created a pause in time, a shared awareness of the power of emotional expression through art. The Italian musician reflected inwardly, considering his own journey and the many times he had relied solely on technical mastery. He realized now that music required more than skill. It required vulnerability, empathy, and a willingness to connect with others on a human level. The young woman's performance had reminded him of this fundamental truth, showing that emotion and authenticity were as important as precision. He felt a subtle shift in his perspective, a humility that was both unsettling and enlightening. The young woman stepped back slightly from the piano, allowing the audience to absorb the lingering resonance of the final notes. Her posture remained calm, her breathing steady, yet inside she felt a quiet thrill of accomplishment. She had not performed to outshine anyone, nor to prove a point through showmanship. She had performed to honor the music, to connect with it fully, and through that connection, she had shared it with everyone present. The experience was profound, both for her and for those who had listened with open hearts. The audience slowly began to clap, a soft, appreciative applause that grew steadily. It was not a loud or boisterous cheer, but a recognition of the depth and sincerity of what they had just experienced. Some individuals rose from their seats, their expressions reflecting awe and admiration. The applause was not simply for the young woman's talent, but for the emotional journey they had all shared, for the way the music had touched them personally and collectively. The Italian musician remained still for a moment longer, absorbing the significance of the performance. He then joined in the applause, his expression reflective but sincere. He had been challenged in a way he had not expected, confronted with a truth that could not be ignored. The young woman had not only demonstrated the power of Chopin's music, but also the importance of sincerity, emotion, and the ability to touch others through art. He felt a renewed respect for both the composer and the performer. As the audience continued to show appreciation, the young woman allowed herself a small, calm smile. She had shared her understanding, her feeling, and her connection to the music. She had not sought recognition, but she accepted it graciously, knowing that the impact of her performance extended beyond applause. The hall seemed lighter, as though the music had released an emotional tension that had lingered unacknowledged, leaving behind a sense of peace and reflection. The Italian musician approached her once more, this time with a more thoughtful expression. "I have played many compositions and I have heard many performers," he said quietly. "But tonight, I have learned something important. Music is not only about what can be played flawlessly, but also about what can be felt and shared. You have reminded me of that, and I am grateful." The young woman nodded, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding, acknowledging not just his words, but the shared recognition of music's true power. As the evening drew on, the atmosphere in the hall remained charged with a lingering sense of inspiration. Conversations resumed, but they were thoughtful, reflective, and filled with genuine admiration. People discussed not only the performance, but also the emotions it had evoked, the subtle lessons in humility, connection, and authenticity. The Italian musician, once dismissive and confident, now moved through the room with a quieter presence, reflecting on what he had witnessed and how it had affected him. The young Polish woman remained near the piano, watching the reactions of the audience with a sense of quiet fulfillment. She had performed not for glory, not for recognition, but to honor the music and let it speak for itself. The response she received, the profound silence followed by thoughtful applause, was a confirmation that she had succeeded in conveying the essence of Chopin's Nocturne. Her heart was light, her spirit content, knowing that she had shared something meaningful and lasting. By the end of the night, it was clear that the performance had created a lasting impression. The Italian musician had been transformed, not through confrontation or argument, but through the quiet power of genuine music. The audience had been moved, touched, and inspired, experiencing a connection that transcended words and technical skill. And the young woman had achieved her purpose, allowing Chopin's music to resonate fully, reminding everyone present of the true beauty and emotional depth that could be found in sincere artistry. The young Polish woman had stepped away from the piano, allowing the room to breathe after the emotional weight of her performance. The audience remained still, savoring the lingering resonance of the Nocturne. For many, it was a moment of reflection, a reminder of the power music could hold when played with honesty and feeling. It was more than a performance. It was a shared experience that connected every listener to the performer and to each other in a quiet, profound way. The Italian musician remained near the piano, his eyes fixed on her, a mixture of awe and humility written across his face. He had come expecting to witness skill and perhaps reinforce his own superiority, but instead he had experienced something far more meaningful. He realized that music was not simply about mastery of notes or the applause of an audience. It was about the ability to convey emotion, to communicate something deeply human through sound. He felt humbled, not defeated, but enlightened by what he had just witnessed. Slowly, he approached her, his steps deliberate. The hall was no longer tense. The audience's silence had shifted to a respectful stillness, an acknowledgement of the significance of what had transpired. He stopped just short of her, looking directly at her eyes. There was no condescension, no trace of arrogance, only sincere respect. "Tonight," he said softly, "I have learned that true music is not about impressing others or showing technical skill. It is about speaking to the heart, and you have done that beautifully. I underestimated Chopin, and I underestimated what you could do with his music. Thank you for reminding me of what matters." The young woman nodded slightly, a calm smile on her face. She had not sought recognition or validation. Her goal had been to honor the music, to let it speak through her, and to offer it freely to those listening. Yet the acknowledgement from the Italian musician held a quiet significance. It was not simply praise, it was an understanding that bridged the gap between skepticism and sincerity. In that moment, a subtle shift had occurred, not only in him but in everyone who had witnessed the exchange. Audience members began to murmur softly, sharing their impressions, their thoughts, and their emotions. Some reflected on the skill and subtlety of her playing, others on the emotional journey the music had taken them on. There were nods, smiles, and quiet expressions of appreciation. It was not the kind of applause that celebrated showmanship or spectacle. It was thoughtful and reflective, a recognition of the authenticity and depth that had been shared. The performance had opened hearts and minds, creating a space where genuine emotion could be felt without restraint. The Italian musician observed all this with a new sense of perspective. He had spent years honing his technique, performing for acclaim, and measuring his worth by external approval. Yet tonight, he understood that such measures were incomplete. Music, at its best, was a conversation between souls, a means of touching others in ways that could not be quantified or controlled. He felt a quiet humility and a desire to learn, not just from her, but from the very experience he had witnessed. It was a lesson that could not be taught, only experienced. The young woman, sensing the gentle admiration and the emotional impact of her performance, allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had practiced tirelessly, not to compete or prove herself, but to understand the music fully and let it come alive through her hands. She had always believed that Chopin's compositions held a unique power, a language of the heart that could reach places words never could. Tonight, she had shared that belief, and the response of the audience, including the Italian musician, affirmed that her dedication had been meaningful. The hall remained still for a while, the music's echoes hanging in the air, carrying with them the intangible sense of connection and understanding. Conversations resumed slowly, measured, thoughtful, as people began to express their admiration without disrupting the fragile beauty of the moment. The applause, when it finally rose, was gentle but sustained, a collective acknowledgement of the emotional depth and authenticity that had been displayed. The Italian musician took a step back, considering the impact of the young woman's performance. He realized that his previous mockery of Chopin had been born of pride and certainty, a desire to assert superiority rather than to appreciate artistry. Tonight, he had seen what true music could do, how it could move hearts, evoke emotion, and create a shared experience that transcended ego. The lesson was profound, and he knew it would influence the way he approached music, performance, and life itself. The young woman, noticing the respectful admiration around her, felt a quiet satisfaction. She had not sought to humiliate or compete, but to honor the music and allow it to resonate. In doing so, she had reminded everyone present that true artistry was more than technical skill. It was about sincerity, empathy, and the courage to convey emotion honestly. She had bridged the gap between expectation and experience, showing that music's power lay not only in notes but in the hearts of those who played and those who listened. The audience gradually began to leave their seats, many approaching the piano to express personal gratitude, to share a few words, or simply to linger a moment longer in the presence of something extraordinary. The Italian musician remained near her, absorbing these exchanges with a thoughtful demeanor. He was no longer the man who had ridiculed Chopin. He had been transformed by what he had witnessed, humbled and inspired in equal measure. It was a rare and valuable lesson, one that he would carry with him always. As the hall emptied, leaving only a few lingering listeners, the Italian musician spoke again, this time more personally. "You have reminded me that music is more than a display of skill. It is a bridge between hearts, a way to share what cannot always be spoken. I am grateful for that reminder. Your performance has left an impression I will not forget." The young woman offered a simple nod, acknowledging both his words and the sincerity behind them. There was no need for further conversation. The mutual respect was clear, unspoken but deeply felt. Outside the hall, the night was calm, a gentle breeze carrying the faint echo of music into the streets. Those who had attended would remember the evening not for the grandeur of the setting, but for the quiet power of the performance, the sincerity of the young woman's expression, and the humility it inspired in even the most confident observer. It was a reminder that true artistry could never be measured by accolades alone, but by its ability to touch hearts and transform perceptions. The Italian musician walked slowly away, reflecting on the lesson he had learned. He thought about his own performances, his previous assumptions, and the way he had measured success. He realized that the truest measure of artistry was not applause or recognition, but the capacity to move others, to communicate emotion, and to leave an indelible mark on those who experienced it. The young woman had demonstrated this perfectly, reminding him that humility and sincerity were as vital as talent. The young Polish woman gathered her sheet music and left the stage, her heart still quietly alight with the fulfillment of having shared something meaningful. She had played not for fame or recognition, but to honor the music she loved and believed in. The response of the audience, the Italian musician, and the subtle, profound silence that followed her performance were all signs that she had succeeded in her purpose. The Nocturne had spoken, and it had been heard, felt, and understood. As the night drew to a close, the hall emptied completely, leaving behind the faint lingering echoes of the music and the sense of connection it had fostered. Those who had been present would carry the memory of the performance with them, a reminder of the power of music to transcend arrogance, to touch hearts, and to create understanding. The Italian musician had learned a lesson in humility, the audience had experienced a rare emotional connection, and the young woman had achieved her goal of allowing Chopin's music to live through her hands. In the quiet that followed, it was clear that something significant had occurred. A performance had transformed not only the listeners but also the performer of another, bridging the gap between doubt and understanding, pride and humility. It was a testament to the enduring power of music, the courage to play sincerely, and the ability of one individual to make a lasting impression on many. The evening would be remembered not for spectacle, but for authenticity, connection, and the timeless resonance of a young woman's heartfelt performance of a beloved nocturne. The young Polish woman stepped away from the piano, her hands still tingling with the memory of the music she had just shared. The hall remained quiet, as if it too was holding its breath, savoring the delicate traces of the nocturne that still lingered in the air. Every person in the audience sat silently, their hearts still caught up in the emotions the music had stirred. Some had tears quietly brimming in their eyes, others rested their hands gently on their chests, feeling the subtle rise and fall of emotions she had brought to life. It was a moment of shared reflection, unspoken yet powerful, and it seemed that even the walls of the hall were reverent, holding on to the memory of her performance. The Italian musician, who had earlier mocked Chopin, stood slightly apart, observing her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had come to the hall confident in his own talent, certain that he understood music better than most. Yet now he realized how wrong he had been. The young woman had played not to impress or to compete, but to let the music speak for itself. He could see now that true mastery was not about speed, precision, or showmanship. It was about conveying feeling, touching hearts, and connecting with others in a way that transcended ego. For the first time, he felt humbled, his usual pride softened by the undeniable truth of what he had witnessed. He stepped closer to her, careful not to disturb the delicate atmosphere that hung over the room. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, sincere, carrying not the arrogance of a critic, but the reverence of someone who had just learned an important lesson. "I have played and heard many compositions," he said quietly, "and I have witnessed countless performances. But tonight, I have seen something I did not expect. You have shown me what music truly is, how it can reach beyond skill, beyond reputation, to touch the soul. I underestimated Chopin, and I underestimated the power of heartfelt performance. Thank you for reminding me of what truly matters." His words were deliberate, filled with an honesty that mirrored the music she had just played. The young woman met his gaze, her calm eyes reflecting both gratitude and understanding. She did not seek praise, but she recognized the significance of his acknowledgement. It was more than approval. It was recognition that the music had spoken, that it had bridged the gap between doubt and belief, pride and humility. She had performed with sincerity, and now the Italian musician, along with the audience, understood that the beauty of Chopin's Nocturne lay not only in the notes themselves, but in the heart that brought them to life. Around the hall, the audience began to shift. Some exchanged quiet glances, silently communicating their shared appreciation for the performance. Others whispered soft words of admiration, but always gently, as if afraid to break the magic that had settled over the room. It was not the kind of applause that erupted immediately and then faded. This was the reverent silence that precedes understanding, the kind of acknowledgement that lingers long after the performance has ended. People were processing, reflecting, letting the music sink deeply into their hearts. They had witnessed something rare, a moment where technique, emotion, and sincerity met perfectly, creating an experience that was both personal and collective. The Italian musician watched as the young woman gathered her sheet music, preparing to leave the stage. Her movements were measured, graceful, and unassuming, yet her presence remained powerful. He had never considered that a performance could teach him something so profound, something that reshaped his understanding not only of music but of humility and human connection. He realized that the most remarkable performances were not about display, but about expression, about opening a window to the inner world and inviting others to see and feel alongside you. Slowly, he found himself clapping, at first hesitantly, then with more certainty. His applause was sincere, filled with admiration and newfound respect. Others joined in, the quiet murmur of appreciation growing into a gentle, steady rhythm. It was not boisterous or showy, but heartfelt and enduring, like the music itself. The young woman smiled softly, acknowledging the appreciation, though her focus remained on the quiet joy of having shared the music fully and honestly. For her, the applause was secondary. The real reward had been the connection she had forged with every person listening. The hall seemed to glow with a shared understanding, a collective recognition of what had transpired. Music had reminded everyone of its true purpose: to touch hearts, to inspire thought, and to connect people in a way that transcended words. Even those who had initially doubted, who had come expecting something ordinary or perfunctory, felt the subtle impact of the performance. They had been moved, changed even slightly, by the honesty and emotional depth she had brought to the Nocturne. It was a lesson in the power of sincerity, in the beauty that comes from playing not for oneself but for the feeling that lives in every note. The Italian musician stepped closer to her once again, his voice quieter this time, almost introspective. "You have reminded me that music is more than sound," he said. "It is a bridge between people. It is a language of the heart. I had forgotten that in my pursuit of perfection, in my need to impress. But tonight, I have seen what it truly means to play with soul, and I am grateful for that lesson." The young woman nodded, recognizing not just his words, but the sincerity behind them. There was no arrogance left, no need to assert superiority. Only respect, understanding, and a shared acknowledgement of the power of music. Outside the hall, the night had grown quiet, a gentle breeze carrying the faint memory of piano notes into the streets. Those leaving the building carried more than the memory of a performance. They carried a reminder of the subtle, enduring power of music, of the way it could speak to something deeper than words or accolades. Conversations outside were soft and thoughtful, reflections on the evening and the experience that had unfolded. People spoke not just of technical skill, but of emotion, connection, and the rare beauty of authenticity. The young woman had created a ripple effect, touching not only the audience, but also the musician who had come with doubt and left with understanding. The Italian musician lingered a moment longer, gazing back at the empty stage. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would remain with him far longer than applause or recognition ever could. He thought of his own performances, his past judgments, and the pride he had carried for years. Now, he understood that true artistry required more than technique. It required courage, vulnerability, and the willingness to share a piece of oneself with others. It was about creating connection, not competition. And in that realization, he felt a quiet sense of transformation, a deep respect for the young woman and the music she had brought to life. The young woman finally stepped out of the hall, her heart calm but her mind alive with the echo of the performance. She had not sought fame or validation. She had sought understanding and expression. The response of the audience and the Italian musician was not what she had aimed for, but it was a gentle affirmation that her intentions had been true and her music had been heard. She walked into the night with a quiet confidence, knowing that she had shared something meaningful, something that could linger in the hearts of those present for a long time. The Italian musician turned to leave, too, his mind thoughtful. He reflected on the lesson he had been given, that music could never be dismissed or diminished simply by judgment or pride. It was living, breathing, capable of moving even the most confident and self-assured individuals when played with sincerity and heart. He realized that the young woman had taught him more than just how to appreciate Chopin's music. She had taught him humility, empathy, and the power of genuine expression. The lesson would stay with him forever, a quiet transformation that would influence his future performances and his understanding of music itself. As the night grew deeper, the hall emptied completely, leaving only the faint echo of the Nocturne in the memory of all who had been present. The performance had created a lasting impression, a reminder of what it meant to play and listen with heart and soul. The Italian musician, the young woman, and the audience had shared a rare experience, one that would remain in their minds long after the final notes had faded. It was a testament to the enduring power of music, the courage to perform with authenticity, and the ability of a single, sincere performance to touch many lives in a quiet, profound way. In the stillness that followed, it was clear that the evening had been transformative. Arrogance had been tempered by humility, doubt had been replaced by respect, and the audience had experienced the pure connection that only music, played with honesty and feeling, could create. The young Polish woman had completed her purpose, bringing the Nocturne to life in a way that spoke to hearts rather than minds, to feelings rather than ego. And in that quiet, profound moment, everyone present understood something that could not be taught, something that could only be felt.